The question often comes up, what about emotion? And where does emotion reside? And is there a role for emotion in thinking about machines? Well, let's stop for a moment and ask, where does emotion reside? Where does it come from? So the body has a nervous system, which is all of these electrical impulses, and they allow me to move and so on and think, etc. But the same electrical wiring that's all through the body is bathed, is washed in hormones and in chemicals. And these two systems overlay one another. So in the human being, everything you think affects your emotion, and all of your emotions affect what you think, because the two systems are inextricable. They're completely entwined. So to be emotional is to be fundamentally human. Now, machines, they have the electrical part, or some form of the electrical part. They don't have the emotional part. So let's leave to machines what they're very good at, and let's keep for us what makes us human, which is this emotional overlay to the rational. And I prefer not to worry about whether machines should have emotion. I think that's placing it incorrectly. This is my bias. I prefer to imagine that we live in emotions. Human beings live in emotioning and in languaging. And this combination of social interaction and rational interaction makes us human. So let's leave it there, and let's not worry about whether or not computers could be emotional. All things come from interaction. The things that we know, how close we are to achieving what our goals may be. Our desires come from interaction. What we may wish to do next comes from interaction. In the beginning was the interaction. This is how I feel about it. And so ignoring interaction is to cut and to make something that should be embodied and fluid disembodied. And when we have disembodied thinking, we get into trouble. Autonomy is the idea that the system makes its own laws, and complex organizations like human beings can have many layers and many perspectives, and therefore create a great deal of autonomy separate from the environment, so that many changes in the environment don't affect the system, and I as a human being can make many choices in that environment. Autopoiesis is a way of talking about self-making, auto, self, poiesis, it's the same root as poetry, which I like very much, making, self-making. I can make myself. Now what that means in biology is that every aspect of me as a living system contributes to making me. There's nothing extra, there's nothing from the outside that comes in except energy and food, essentially. But all of the processes that make who I am, make who I am. That's the definition of autopoiesis. The result of that is that I create an identity, a boundary around myself, which is what you see, and you have your autopoiesis, and back and forth. And we do this dance where we think of ourselves as autonomous and separate, but in fact we are still dependent because we learn from each other and we make the necessary learning to create our own rules as a result of interactions. So there is no absolute autonomy. There is only the dependence of autonomy. This is a paradox, but it's a very beautiful paradox. So from autonomy and rules to an autopoietic system, we end up with a fundamental structure of human relations, which is we must be social in order to be our identities. To become autopoietic, we have to be interacting. That interacting is a dependency, and that dependency leads to the culture we make, the way we interact with each other, and ultimately how, through language, we exist in each other's worlds. So being human is to be an autopoietic system engaged in interaction, which gives us a degree of autonomy, a degree of dependence at the same time, within which we have our own responsibilities. So for the human animal, the question arises, what is our responsibility individually? And I believe in what Heinz von Forster called the ethical imperative, which is to act always to increase the number of choices. And if I act to increase all choices, my choices, your choices, then the society as a whole is better off, because this is not imposing my beliefs on you and narrowing your options and forcing you to do certain things, but it lifts us all. It gives us all an opportunity. So to a social creature, responsibility means not to crush the other's possibilities, but always to treat the other as an equal, which would mean to be open to change and open to be an agent of change to someone else. So the autonomy and the responsibility are two sides of the same coin, I think. To be autonomous is to separate, but because I depend on you for my autonomy, I depend on you to learn from, to know what rules I wish to make, then this comes back to being responsible not to prevent you from making your rules, and vice versa. You must allow me to make my rules.